the course of our lives, many of us suffer tragic illnesses, experience cruel injustices, or grieve a deep personal loss. And when these things happen, we often ask, why me, God? I'm Steve Aubrey. Sometimes it's hard to believe in a caring, compassionate God in the midst of our personal struggles. Coming up, we'll hear from a cancer survivor whose faith got him beyond the question of why me. But first, a story about false accusations, injustice, and a faith that triumphed over it all.
I've always been looked at, and I've always been stared at, and to this day I'm stared at, but I've grown to, overlook it, and, and I just say, hey, this is the way God made me, so, I can't do anything about it, so this is the way it is.
Dale Akiki was born with a rare genetic disorder that gave him an enlarged head and odd appearance. He was singled out for suspicion when hysteria over supposed satanic ritual abuse of children ignited fears at his church in 1988 and 89. Dale and his wife Sharon taught in the church preschool and soon began to be accused of horrible crimes against the children.
I've been through a lot throughout my life, and here I found, a person that I fell in love with and was going to, we got married, and then this hits us in the face, and we know we didn't do anything, and we're just asking, why are you guys accusing us if we didn't do anything? And
it was a shock because I was a preschool teacher for such a long time, and for people that I've known for a long time to come back and say I did all these things, it was really a shock. I went around to the different teachers that were teaching at the time, and I asked them, what did I do? And they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know nothing about it. The only people that knew about it was the main staff and the parents that were saying these things. So it's like everybody else was like, I don't know what's going on, And it's like, yeah, you ask, why me? Why at this time, when I'm doing so well?
After being forced out of the church by the controversy, the Akikis turned to the community Sharon grew up in, St. Paul's Lutheran Church and its pastor, Richard Alsing.
I guess when all of this started to develop, that's when Dale and Sharon came back and started worshiping with us again. And I didn't think a whole lot about it. I knew that Sharon had gone off to this other church and met this young man and had fallen in love with him and all of this kind of thing. And so when we met Dale, we were real pleased to meet him and welcome him into our midst. And it just kind of continued that way for a while. And then I remember one evening when I came to your home, and I wasn't really aware of what all was going on, and Dale and Sharon really impressed me with how forthright they were. They shared with me right at the outset of our visit what was taking place, and how would the congregation respond to this? How would I respond to it and everything? They were very concerned. And I'll admit, initially, with the accusations being the type that they were, we all tend to want to believe kids and so forth, and I just wasn't sure. And I liked Dale, and the more I got to know him, the more I liked him, and it wasn't long before I was fully convinced that this man had been falsely accused.
They said, you're under arrest for, child molestation, and they put the handcuffs on me, and they threw me in the back of the car.
Dale was arrested in 1991 based on the testimony of children whom it is believed were encouraged to create wild stories by the child therapist investigating the case.
Counts 1 through 50, guilty or not guilty, sir?
Not guilty.
Not guilty plea will be entered.
Without a shred of physical evidence against him, he would spend the next 2.5 years held without bail behind bars.
Scared, because I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought they would just take me down there and say, this is what it is, and then, everything would work out, maybe in a day or so, but 2.5 years later it did.
I walked to the stairwell to go upstairs to the condo, and all these cops were all lined up on the door and says, are you Mrs. Akiki? And I says, well, yeah. And I said, well, we have a warrant to search your place, but they didn't find anything. They took everything, but they didn't find anything.
When I visited in their home, it was before Dale's arrest, and that was sort of really our first real time together, real exposure together. So we were just very much in the process of just getting acquainted. And then when his arrest occurred, and I heard what the circumstances were, I guess one of my biggest concerns was the fact that, here were folks that were involved in a church and Christian people who, really believed their children and were concerned and obviously upset and a lot of accusations being made. And I had a concern for this young man that, if this is what Christianity is all about, who needs it? And so that's why I felt it was very important to try to see him on a regular basis and offer a pastoral ministry to him during that jail time.
There was, a pastor in the church that, in the jail that would go around and, if you wanted any counseling or something, he came up to me and he said, to my jail door, and he just spoke to me. He said, if you have anything that you would like to talk about to get off your chest, I'll be more than happy to, talk to you. And he says, like, you would like to, confess to what you did. And I said, I have nothing to confess. I haven't done a thing. And he says, okay, well then, I'll leave you like you are. And then he walked away, and that was the last time I saw him. I knew that the main person knew that I was innocent, and that was God. And I just said, I'm leaving it into his hands. And that's what I did. And he pulled me through it, and so did the support I got from St. Paul's and from hundreds of people that I didn't even know at the time.
Don't forget the guys in jail.
And these certain guys in the jail that I met, and they were gang members, and they were being, there for, their own thing, and they just took me underneath their wings, and they protected me, and they said, we won't let anything happen to you, and they even told my mom that.
Dale mentioned some of the very hardline criminals that defended him while he was in jail. And I had to see that as the hand of God, sort of putting a shield or a protection around him during that terrible time and terrible experience. Theologically, the angle that I was trying to develop in my conversations with Dale was the idea of trying to find some positive spin-offs of this experience. I think when a person is going through tremendous suffering, sure, there is some comfort in knowing that others have suffered too, like Job and so forth. But I think the larger question is, what's God going to do with this situation?
I knew that he existed, and that this was just like a trial that I was going through, and to see how my faith was. And I said, I'm not going to let these guys win, because I know I didn't do anything, and I know that my wife didn't do anything, and I know the other lady didn't do anything. So, I said, I'm just going to prove my innocence, and however long it took. And I had God on my side.
Probably the insight that I shared with him that registered in greatest measure was the idea that Jesus himself was falsely accused. And what he went through to redeem the world from sin. And it really, I think, gave Dale well, what do I want to say? Kind of a comfort, because here's the Son of God who's gone through a very similar experience.
I said, I forgive them, for what they're doing. And I did, and I kept reading the Bible so that it would keep my faith up, and with Pastor coming to see me, that helped me, and that kept me strong. And I said, I'm not going to hold a grudge, and because it just makes you old.
I think that part of the trial that was most difficult for Dale was when the children were making these wild accusations. And as you get to know Dale, he's a man that has a lot of love and compassion. And he would just kind of look at me, and he'd just, you know, with those big eyes, and he'd say, "Pastor, why are they saying these things about me?" He just couldn't understand it. And I think that was the part of the trial that was the most difficult for him in terms of his emotions and keeping control and so forth.
When the jury went out, and when it hit me, and I said, you know, my whole life is in those, you know, people's hands, and, you know, if they come back with a guilty verdict, you know, I had all these thoughts going through my head, but then I always, you know, then when I got back to my cell, I said to myself, and I prayed, and I said that, you know, that I told Sharon that I would never leave her, and I wasn't going to let them win, you know, by me doing this. And so I just prayed and prayed. And
I remember when we get together, we usually, Dale would bring his Bible down from his cell, and we'd get together in one of those little attorney rooms, and we'd have a Bible study together. And in fact, we were studying the story of David and Goliath when the news of his acquittal came in, actually at that time.
We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Dale Anthony Akiki, not guilty of the crime of child abuse in
After a 7-month trial, it took the jury less than 7 hours to acquit Dale of all 35 charges. Jurors said they didn't believe the testimony of the children, and one juror said it had seemed like a witch hunt.
Everybody, this is the greatest man anybody could ever know. So let's let him go home. Okay?
The devil doesn't stop at the church door. Every congregation, every Christian knows what temptation is, knows what sin is, knows that we daily fall short and need to come to the cross of Calvary and ask for forgiveness. And I think these people are beautiful people because they really have become models of forgiveness and letting the past be in the past and moving on with their lives.
I have, you know, because it's like what Pastor said, that, you know, they did what they had to do, and we did what we had to do, you know, and the truth prevailed. And, you know, so we hold no grudges, you know, and so, you know, it's just, to forgive is to forget, and that's what we've done.
I think Dale would be the first to admit that he experienced a strengthening during his trial and his test that cannot be duplicated, and it strictly comes from God. And so I would say to the person out there that is really wondering about God's ways, I would just plead with them to trust Him and to wait on Him, as it says in Isaiah. And He does have a marvelous way of strengthening and redirecting and giving new insight.
You know, God works in His time, and to wait on Him, just like what the pastor said, and that's what I did. And it took 2.5 years for me to wait, and for anybody else that, you know, if they just wait on Him, He works in His time, and He'll see you through it. And that's what He did for us, and we, you know, praise God every day for that.
A lot of people ask the question, why me? Why did I have to get cancer? If you take that argument to its end, it's really an argument with God. The question is not why me. The question is, what can I do with this experience? Towards what end might it be used?
Greg Anderson is a cancer survivor, and he offers hope to other cancer patients through an organization called Cancer Conquerors.
In 1984, I was given 30 days to live. A surgeon put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Greg, your cancer is back. I don't know what to tell you other than go home and try to die with some peace. 4 months prior, I'd had a lung removed, and now I was back in the hospital, and it had a lymph node just explode on me here in the neck. And the second operation was unsuccessful, and that's when they said that there's no hope. And so that was in December of 1984. It seems to me that that surgeon was wrong, basically because he could not have predicted how any individual would react to a diagnosis of cancer. And my premise is a simple one. It is important when you get a diagnosis of cancer to make a radical decision. Are we going to spend our time working on getting well, or are we going to spend our time preparing for our death? And in that very decision lies tremendous power and tremendous hope. And indeed, I was the fortunate one to choose hope. I think of the cancer journey now. It changed my life so very much. On the physical level, I took a look at all the things I had not been doing. And indeed, I started to exercise right in the middle of the cancer journey. I changed my diet significantly. Those are physical things that can be done. But beyond that, there were tremendous emotional changes. I looked at how I reacted to life, how I responded to circumstances. And I came to realize that there's tremendous power in our emotional outlook, and indeed our spiritual outlook. I came to realize that it was not cancer or the circumstances of life that were the most important issue, but how I responded. It was not reality, but my interpretation of it. I began to respond with less emotional hills and valleys. Try to develop, and continue to this day to try to develop, a strong emotional and spiritual underpinning. And of course, the spiritual journey itself. Up to that time, I was reasonably good in terms of some of the rules and regulations, if you will, of the spiritual journey. The religious part, if you will, doctrines and creeds, I understood. But the spirit of those, perhaps I was left wanting. Cancer made me rethink that entire spiritual premise of my life, and today certainly have a tremendous spiritual strength that I never had prior to this near-fatal experience. Cancer was the very best thing that happened to my life. Now that may seem incredible to a lot of people when they first look at it, but the positives of cancer are that it gives us, amongst other things, an opportunity to look at our lives on many levels. One of the most precious things to come out of my experience of cancer is a deepened relationship with many people, not the least of which is my family. My wife and I treasure time like we never have before, and that's not in some attempt to hang on to it. It's to treasure this very moment. Did you ever, when you were a young person, take a little piece of mirror and you'd reflect the sun and you could shine that light into the dark corners? Well, so it is with cancer. Cancer is like our lives being a little broken piece of mirror. Some people say life is over, but not so. Cancer is really taking this little broken piece of mirror and reflecting God's light. That's following His will. And it's reflecting that light into the darkest little corners of life. That's how to take cancer and turn it from what looks like the biggest negative in our lives into what can be a tremendous spiritual turning point.
Bad things do happen to good people, I admit that. But I do think we live in a time in which many people are totally unwilling to take any responsibility for their own share in the bad things that happen. That would be my first rather tough love approach.
Dr. George Farrell is a renowned Christian theologian.
I have seen other people suffer very, very much and in my judgment, undeservedly. But on the other hand, I found them very often people that were sources of strength to me because they understood what was happening to them better than than I could understand it from the outside. And they identified with Jesus Christ, whose suffering has also been the felix culpa, the happy guilt, that our evil has created the salvation that we have experienced. So for us as Christians, of course, we believe that the end is good. And so even if bad things happen, the end is good. But and I believe those of us who have the resources to help people when things go wrong, we have an obligation to help the best we can, even if the undeserving. Many of us find that adverse experiences teach us about adversity and make us more sympathetic. Most of us are more sympathetic once we have undergone similar experience. The old illustration, you have to walk in somebody's shoes before you really understand them. I think that's true for all of us. I'm encouraged by the Psalms in the Old Testament, where the psalmist argues with God and says, why do you do that to me? And I've felt that way. And I think God is a real partner to us, and we have the right to be angry and unhappy and say, why do you do that to us? I think somebody who never has argued with God really doesn't believe in him. I think it's part of being a Christian or a Jew, I'm quoting Jews mostly when I talk about the psalmist, to be angry with God when bad things happen. And I think that this is normal, but on the other hand, David never lost his faith, even if the bad things happened. He never lost his faith in God. And so I think we must, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief when things like that happen. And we are encouraged even by the fact that Jesus in Gethsemane was arguing with God with his Father about his fate. The other thing is to learn that God loves people that are in trouble. I mean, even Job. And if you can't think of anybody who had a little more trouble than Job. But finally, Job didn't say, I don't deserve that. He'd said it all the time. At the end, he said, who am I to argue with God? And I think that is really the biblical attitude, that we take the good with the bad, and we trust him, trust God, even if things don't turn out the way we wanted them to turn out.
When events seem to be conspiring against you, and you feel like saying, why me, God? You're on the right track. God wants you to go to him with all of your concerns, especially when you're in trouble. Only God can give you the peace to cope with the pain. Come to Jesus, who said, I am gentle. You shall find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God bless you.